Hey folks, this is Eric, the ambassador of common sense, and I'm here with...
I'm Dan, the ambassador of nonsense.
And we're here to podcast about Catholic things. And once again, we missed a week. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
But...
well, and before we get started, though, I got to give the beer of the week. This week, it's Nefarious Harbor, which is a New England IPA brewed by Evil Czech Brewery in Mishawaka, Indiana.
Well, it's not like they could enjoy this beer with us.
Well, I know, but they could go out and like try it out. Sometimes people like exploring new things.
I think if he's going to pull this crap, I think Danny should have to send me at least one of the beers
six-pack
before he tells me, well, this is what we're drinking.
That's a good point. I should make sure that...
I've got coffee. That's all I got.
Coffee?
I'm going to have the coffee of the week.
What kind of coffee you got? What's the coffee of the week?
Folgers.
It's not Folgers, is it?
It's always Folgers. I never have anything but Folgers.
I'm going to have to send you some coffee along with the beer then.
Have you seen my new coffee maker?
I did. Does it have a grinder?
No.
Then what good is it?
I don't grind my coffee. That's too much work. I'm going to post a picture of my coffee maker. You
need to put it on our website.
Yeah, it's got 6 pot warmers and it's got 2 brewing stations. I saw it at an auction and it was only going for $5. I'm like, I got to try to get that. So I got it for $5.
It's a crowd pleaser.
Huh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I said it's a crowd pleaser for sure.
Yeah, and I walked in with that thing. Vicky was so angry at me. Where are you going to put that thing?
You have it in the kitchen though, right?
Yeah, I hooked it up in the kitchen and hooked the water up to it, and now in the morning I just go in and press a button, and I got a full pot of coffee.
And you get to pick. You can pick from either of 2 brewing ports.
Well,
and you can set your pot on any of 6 burners. Look at all the options you have.
Kinda. What happened is if I plug both of the brewing ports in, it'll blow a fuse.
Oh, so you got a little bit of work.
I can either rewire and get a dedicated line, or I could just only use one brewer, which is what I'm doing.
Okay. Or find out what else is competing with it and tell them to turn it off.
The refrigerator.
Oh, I guess that doesn't work. All right. The fruit's going to go soggy. I got to brew some coffee.
Yeah, you guys are going to have to go ahead and drink spoiled milk for a week while I figure this out. Okay, well, today we are talking about... I don't even know how to describe what we're talking about. We're talking about... I was going to say truthers, because I thought truthers was a general term, but it's actually not. Truthers are people who believe that 9/11 was a conspiracy that people like George Bush knew about and could have stopped but didn't. But I guess it's not just them, though. I wanted to talk about conspiracy theories in general, which include... geocentrists, flat earthers, what is it? Oh, the ones who, I don't know what you call them. They deny we landed on the moon.
Right.
9/11 people. And, I'm trying to think of a couple. Well, you know who would be included in that is the traditionalists.
Yeah.
The
Oklahoma City.
Oklahoma, who? Tim.
The people who think the Oklahoma City bombing was,
Tim McVeigh?
A
is that his
name? Yeah, Timothy McVeigh was just a patsy and so forth.
No, he was just a nutcase who decided to kill people.
Well, I mean, you go all the way back. I mean, President Kennedy.
Yeah. Well,
that's another whole group of truthers, conspiracy theorists.
And it's easy to believe a lot of these. Because a lot of people spend hours and hours and days and weeks and years building up a case for something. And you can't prove them wrong,
Yeah.
Or at least it would be very hard to prove them wrong because you can't really prove a negative. You can only prove a positive. So
Right. But if the central tenet is that anything that's presented as proof is part of the conspiracy.
Right. Yeah. So
as a quick, and maybe I'm diverting the conversation here, but a quick, by the way, folks, just so you know, we don't plan these conversations ahead at all, in case you couldn't tell. We pick a topic and then just kind of have at it.
Right.
So it goes in ways that neither one of us quite expected it would when these things.
Right.
So as an intellectual exercise, let's assume for a minute that all the conspiracy theories are correct. Now, you can't really do that because some of them contradict others.
Yeah.
But let's assume they're all correct. Does that change what we need to be about as Christians?
It's like I brought this up and I had a point I want to get to, but you just jumped right there.
Okay, I thought it was. All
right, guys. So we'll see you next week.
Okay, well let's get to that point later and talk a little bit about some of the conspiracy theories.
Right. But that is the main point when it comes to being a Catholic and trying to live your life out the way a Catholic should. That's really the question you got to end up asking, and most of the time it doesn't change what you need to do every day and stuff like that. There are some cases it might though. For example, the trads. I hear these conspiracies that Pope XXX was kidnapped, and then they elected another pope even though he was actually alive. So they've got this whole fake
papacy thing. I have not heard of the kidnapping theory.
I was bringing that. I don't know about kidnapping, but I've heard that.
Oh, okay. But yeah, they have
that there was a secret conclave held, and they elected another pope, and just things like that. And I guess if we really had a false pope, and this other guy is claiming to be pope, telling us we got to do this, well, then maybe that would change what you would do if it were true. So, or if you thought it was true.
Have they? Because we've both known a lot of trads, and there's I don't know how many of our listeners know what trads even are.
I think probably most of them do, but a trad is it's kind of changed though, because a lot of people who are actual Catholics consider themselves to be traditional, but the way we've always looked at it, a trad is someone who is actually broken off from the church. They are not Catholic anymore because they don't recognize, say, Pope Francis as the Pope.
Right. But they didn't recognize John Paul II as the Pope.
Right.
Either. Or, going back, I think even like Paul VI
Vatican,
or John the 23rd.
Yeah. I mean, Vatican II was their point. Well, this shows that we are living in a false church or whatever.
Yeah, they consider Vatican II to have been a false council under a false pope, and everything that happened since then to be the false church, and including the mass that was created by Paul VI afterwards, and so forth.
I guess that's the only conspiracy I would say
kind of matters.
Right. Because the other ones usually don't. But then again, they kind of do. Especially as you get further and further away from what appears to be happening. For example, flat earthers. If you're going to walk around and talk about a flat earth, you got to have some kind of reason for doing that. And if you're going to talk about them faking the moon landing, you got to have some kind of reason for this. And I've yet to hear any reason. Like the arguments I've had with people, and I'm surprised that I would have these arguments with people because up until like 2 years ago, I didn't even know these people existed. But the arguments are always, NASA is fake and they're doing it to get money and giving evidence that this or this or this could be faked. Instead of saying, this is why you would believe the earth is flat.
Right.
You say, this is why the earth is not. I don't even know how to explain it because it's so bizarre sometimes.
The flat earth one is, it's kind of funny. I learned about flat earthers when I was, and I don't even know that they called them flat earthers then. I don't think that was a term yet. It was around, I want to say, right around the turn of the century, maybe 99, 2000, somewhere around there. Internet was a thing, but it wasn't quite as fully developed as it is now. We certainly didn't have Twitter and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. And at least not in the popular sense that like that is. But you had search engine, you could go and search for things. Well, I was thinking about kind of things like Christopher Columbus, and people say, well, before Columbus, people thought the Earth was flat. Columbus proved it's round, stuff like that. And we know that's not really the way it was.
Right.
And I got to thinking, I said, I bet that among the general, what you consider the scientific of the day, I bet there was really never a period in most of human history when the general consensus of people who cared about such questions was that the Earth was flat rather than round. I think throughout most of the history, people understood the Earth as a sphere. And I went online to do a search to try to, find out whether there's anything that's been written, the history of science development or anything like that could show that there was a period when the general intelligent scientific class, I don't mean intelligent, I mean learned scientific class of people believed that the Earth was flat. And I didn't find anything about that question, but I found out that there's a thriving, and at the time it was extremely small, but very dedicated community of people who believe right then and there that the Earth is flat, and it floored me.
Yeah, you kind of left scratching your head like, well, there's so many ways to prove this, and not one of you have decided to just look, maybe go up in an airplane and
exactly.
And it's kind of bizarre. And there's also, Jason was telling me about a book he had picked up, and the book was Old Earth versus New Earth. And
the theory about the age of the Earth.
Right. And of course, what we're talking about now aren't necessarily conspiracies, but it is
just interpretations of science that
we kind of know what's what for a lot of things. We know that the Earth is round. There's no real reason to have a discussion about that. And there's no, but anyway, there might be a discussion about a young Earth. I don't know. I've never heard a good one, but maybe there is some evidence out there that the Earth is young. But one of the things in this book, Jason said, is that they said that there is a model, geocentric model that works.
The Young Earth book has a geocentric model that worked.
Well,
is it a spherical? It's not flat though, right?
It's spherical, but it's not even. They don't even tell the model. They just say that it exists. That mathematically they can show where the planets are going to be. And I know they had some sort of model that predicted some things at one time. Oh, but
Ptolemy had a model that was, pretty good at predicting movements of planets and stuff like that. But the model didn't work because it didn't explain anything. It just, it was a extrapolation model. It said, mathematically we see these behaviors and we continue to see the same behaviors. He had a model that had planets and orbits and epicenter orbits and all that kind of stuff. But it didn't present a cohesion that explained one planet's movement with a underlying reason that also explained the other planet's movement, and so on and so forth.
Right. Well, what occurs to me is that there's no real reason to believe that the Earth is at the center that I can think of. Where I'm scratching my head is there some kind of religious reason why we should believe that the sun goes around the Earth? And I can't find any. And
it's interesting. Because my son was just talking about this the other day, and I forget why he brought it up, but he mentioned he reads a lot about philosophy of science and stuff like that, and he said actually among those in that same society before Ptolemy came up with his Earth-centric model with the planets on orbits with epicenter orbits and stuff like that, most of the community, the learned before him, actually considered the universe to be heliocentric.
Yeah.
And by coming up with his model, he actually convinced people to leave that view and join an Earth-centric view. Which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
I never knew that.
The funny thing is that there are still people who believe it. And it seems like a religious matter to them. Just as much as the 9/11 truthers and the I can kind of see young versus old Earth might enter into something there, but the flat earthers, I'm trying to think of some of the other conspiracies. I mean, they're really passionate about it.
Yeah.
And what I've never understood is if a lot of this stuff is provable by math. If you're that passionate about it, why don't you just do?
Yeah, especially the science stuff. I mean, some of the other conspiracies, historical event type conspiracies, okay, I get that it's not necessarily provable. You have to, at some point, either take somebody's word or decide you're going to reject everybody's word.
Right.
But yeah, exactly. A lot of this stuff, you can see it. It's kind of interesting because you say that it becomes a religion for a lot of people. And I think about, like, for example, my own sense of groundedness in, say, the Catholic faith. I use the Catholic faith sort of as a lens to interpret what I know, to be able to see and understand things that occur. So somebody, brings up some fact and it's like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense within the Catholic faith. Or, okay, according to the Catholic faith. For example, okay, we talk about marriage. Marriage, a committed relationship between a man and a woman for the sake of raising the children, blah, 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 and on and on. Okay, so somebody might point out, well, for most of the history of the world, most of the population of the world didn't have that exact concept of marriage. It's like, well, okay, from my vantage point in the Catholic faith, they might think that what they're pointing out is that our concept of marriage is therefore somehow invalid because it's not endorsed by the majority of the world throughout world history. But to me, it's just, well, that makes perfect sense because the very first parents fell and through sin in the world, people were going to come up with a lot of crazy ideas about how to handle children and bisexuality and all that kind of stuff.
And they didn't have the church.
And they didn't have the church. They didn't even have the Old Testament guidance of God leading through prophets or anything like that. So they would have got, I mean, the whole story of the fall is how men got away from their humanity. Well, so, the church already provides an explanation for that. And so sometimes it's like, well, okay, when somebody else has the same kind of rejoinder about, for example, evidence of a 9/11 theory or something like that, they're engaging in the same kind of mental exercise, but it's like, well, what are they putting their faith in?
Right.
What justifies that kind of loyalty to an interpretation of the world just for the sake of saying those people are lying and those people are lying and those people are lying? You don't gain salvation from it. You're not saying here's a path that's going to lead to eternal happiness or anything like that. I think it goes to your question. Why?
Yeah, even if you've got the truth and you figured it out and you figured out who's lying and who's not, it doesn't really help you at all.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I would say that's even the case when in these religious conspiracies. We have to follow the church as we know it, and just because you can, how do I say this?
Provide some scenario in which it might be the false church,
right?
I think is what you're going for, right?
Right, and that wouldn't make it sinful for you to follow the visible church.
Exactly.
Because
and in fact, it might make it very, even though you can come up with some scenario, you might still be acting very irresponsibly, even to the point of sin, to not follow the visible church.
Right. So you've got this conspiracy that, I don't know, could conceivably be true, isn't very plausible, but you're going to go ahead and go with this other guy who might or might not be a priest at this point, depending on whether or not your theory's true. And
yeah, exactly.
On the other hand, we've got this church who it's made up of people who are all fallen and are doing some pretty terrible things. But there's no indication that those kinds of people were never in the church before. I mean, we've always had these people like
exactly.
The stuff that's happening in America now. There's no reason to think that this has never happened before. Well, we know that these kinds of things did happen. I don't know if it was ever this bad, but
I think sometimes I think there were some times when it did get pretty bad. Maybe not in exactly the same way, but the same kind of abuses. Especially, I would say probably it's even likely that there were times when it was even worse, because when you think of leading, the early and middle ages, how connected ecclesiastical and civil government was.
Right, there's incredible opportunity
princes
for
would
abuse.
Appoint bishops, and exactly, it was even more. The opportunity was even greater. The temptation of clerics to abuse their power because they also wielded a certain amount of civil authority was even greater. There's no reason to think that they didn't also. There weren't periods that they also went through this. Now, the modern age, there are certain kinds of evil that has a greater opportunity to gain a footing in people's hearts because of things like the communications technologies we have and that kind of stuff. But in terms of the behavior of priests and bishops and the abuse of their authority and how they treated some of their parishioners and that kind of stuff, no, I don't think. I think maybe ours is perhaps the most well-documented example.
Well, that's definitely true
in history. That's because of the kinds of communications technologies.
Yeah, and it's just never existed before. I really hate to say this, but I think there's a sense of, I don't know if you'd call it vanity or pride, and I think it's people wanting to believe that they themselves are somehow part of an elite group who has discovered something that no one else has discovered. And
isn't that kind of like Gnosticism? Ancient religious idea, originating in Jewish Christian milieu, 1st, 2nd centuries, believed that the material world's, this is Wikipedia, not the Catholic explanation, believed that the material world's created by basically an emanation of God, like a lower God, tapping, divine, trapping the divine spark within the human body. That divine spark, that divinity could liberated by gnosis, which is like a spiritual knowledge acquired through direct experience. They taught that all matter is evil, and the non-material spiritual realm is good. There's an unknowable God who gave rise to the creator of the material universe is not supreme God.
I guess it could
deal
be
with sin,
kind
but it's this idea of tapping into a special kind of knowledge that we have and you don't.
Yeah,
sounds the same to me.
And they're kind of protected because they would say, well, it's not a secret knowledge. I try to tell everyone. It's just that nobody believes me. And it's like, well, nobody believes you because the things around us that we can see and all of the evidence that we have would point to your being wrong. But okay, again, we get back to, well, I can prove that this could happen, but they never give me a reason to think that maybe it did, other than the fact that they've been able to figure it out and no one else has.
There's one. I'll give you the most reasonable conspiracy theory that I'm aware of. And I think it's still bunk. I'm not trying to promote it here, but the one that is just at least slightly reasonable that people claim is the moon landing one. Now there's moon landing people who are flat earthers who think there's no way we could go to the moon for whatever reason, whatever. But there's one school of theorists out there who say the very first moon landing was a big old Hollywood hoax that was perpetrated because NASA was under the gun and they couldn't pull it off. But then subsequent moon landings really did happen. Okay, that's kind of one of those, well then so what? You know what I mean? It's like, okay, it's like, well, okay, you're not putting yourself out there in terms of like just completely outside of normal human experience. But then so what?
Yeah.
It's kind of like the theory. I have a book of kind of common.
Well, you know why they say that?
Why?
Because we can't. You would have a hard time proving the first landing, but you can prove that we've been there.
Oh, okay. Because you can
with the mirrors
put telescopes up and see. Yeah.
I don't think we can see any
off the surface and that kind of stuff.
We can't see any landing
that's what
spots. I wonder if the Hubble telescope can see the landing spots on. I've never looked that up. I mean, it'd have to be pretty powerful to see something that small, but
right.
Okay.
But since we've been there, why bother to hold on to a theory that we didn't get there the first time?
Right. What does it matter?
It's that Gnostic temptation that I have special knowledge.
Yeah. Another part of this, and I think this is a problem with I guess it's cultural that we tend to do, is to take science and make it a lot more complicated, or make it sound more complicated than we really have the ability to understand. So
yeah,
you've got people. I'm trying to think. I watched this. I don't know much about quantum mechanics. I watch a documentary every now and then, and sometimes after watching it, I'll go up and look some stuff up to figure out what they're talking about. But this one documentary started talking about particles and things not behaving the way they normally would, and seeming to behave magically and mysteriously. And the more they talked about it, it's almost like the less they explained. And it started to talk. It started to sound, and this was on PBS, I think. But by the end of the show, you're thinking you need a degree in at least 5 different areas to figure any of this out. But for example, they talked about this experiment where electrons were behaving a certain way, and then they would, I think it was shine light on it, or find some other way to observe the electrons as they're passing through this area, and then suddenly they stop behaving that way. And in the show, they actually said it was apparent that observing the electrons, the observation of the electrons, is what's changed their behavior. And I thought, that's kind of, that doesn't sound right to me. And it didn't sound right to me at the time. And I looked into it, and they were talking about Heisenberg uncertainty principle. And it just, the way they make it sound is that it's so complicated that there's no hope of finding out what the truth is. So, and this is the same way with things like evolution, climate change. They make it sound like if you want to get to the truth, don't look at the science part of it. Just look at the evidence that we're showing you.
Don't dig and try to understand.
Right. Just this guy said this, so probably he was lying, and things like that. And I think that feeds the conspiracy theorists, and it makes it worse.
Right.
When they make science sound like some kind of secret religion, when it's not. If you question something, you can just go look it up. It's not hard. Or find out how they figured it out and do it yourself.
Yeah. Well, and when they try to make science, I don't know if the right word is like deify science, but they make science into something that can tell us more than it really tells us.
Oh, yeah. That's another, yeah.
That again, the conspiracy theorists, the so-called truthers, I mean, they seize on that stuff. When people try to put science out there as showing things that anybody with a reasonable, like, holistic sense of thinking that can think about all the various parts of the world together, they can see the bunk that, you know what, you can say you did an experiment and here was the result, but that doesn't have anything to do with what you're saying it claims. Science has proven, for example, God doesn't exist, to take an extreme example. Or like there was one that just floored me. Stephen Hawking. Okay, he's supposedly brilliant, and I'm sure that in a certain mathematical way he is brilliant. But he made this ludicrous statement. Because there's this question of the universe and its origin and its fundamental origin. He said, well, the universe is self-generating, and he said. And as long as the words that I remember that were put on the radio, as they were read on the radio, I don't know if this is his words or a trend, kind of like a reinterpretation by the guy that was saying it. But what I heard was, as long as the law of gravity exists, the universe will always generate itself. It's like, okay, really?
That's a weird thing to say.
Exactly. It's like you don't even get that you're putting out there a provision, as long as the law of gravity exists. Okay, well, why does the law of gravity... Let's suppose you're right about that. why does the law of gravity exist?
Yeah.
The
thing is, if you
get that.
When people scientists who have somehow become a public figure, they say a lot of things like that. And if you question them at all, it's kind of like, well, what, do you have a degree in physics? Are you
right?
Yeah, and it's like, well, no, but I'm sorry, it just doesn't make sense. And if one of the points of science is to make things make sense, make things understandable so that they can be predictable. And that doesn't help anyone. The kinds of things Stephen Hawking would lay out there.
Would say, yeah.
And, he would talk about wormholes, but I don't think there was, I looked and I could not find any kind of real evidence that wormholes actually existed or that even potentially could exist. But he talked about them as if they happen all the time.
Yeah.
And as if they were a definite, and it was kind of like, well, all right. There was a...
I think we could return... one of the scientists who I have a lot of respect for, I wish he had been a little bit more thoughtful in his thinking about God, but Albert Einstein was, for example, somebody who didn't do that kind of stuff. He was a plotter. He figured things out, and he would work it and work it and work it until he understood it. And now some of his stuff is very difficult to understand for somebody who hasn't gotten the math in order to be able to understand his equations and that kind of stuff. But there's an example of a guy who worked and worked and worked and worked, and he came out with theories, but his theories weren't just statements about things like, cosmology, the universe is self-generating or anything like that. His work was models. And he had a model of, for example, space-time and gravity and other stuff, which he, we know it as the theory of relativity. And he, published it and that kind of stuff. Well, there's a guy who has developed a model with predictive value, and to this day, in our most sensitive capacities of all of our instruments to measure the effects of different kinds of things that would show deviations from his model and the previous, more classical model, his model has not yet been it's continued to be predictive to the to the full extent of our ability to measure.
Yeah. The funny thing is the show that I was talking about that talked about, they were talking about quantum mechanics, and one of the things they talked about a lot was the fact that Einstein, I don't remember exactly what they said, but the feeling you got is that Einstein's theories and Einstein's predictions were proven wrong, and they had to come up with a new model. And they made it sound like if you've got, say, something really small that classical mechanics doesn't apply to. And I thought, well, maybe it does apply. Maybe it's just so small that you can't measure what's happening. Things like that. Right. And my point is that when they use science to make something sound so scary that you can't figure out, I think that a lot of conspiracy theories come out of that. But okay,
I think you're right.
My point is that if it's okay to accept what appears to be true.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who are unhappy with the world the way it exists and want to find some way to make it make more sense or maybe even change it, a lot of times fall for these theories that will, I don't know how to say it, how they'll make them see that,
I think a lot of times it absolves them of certain responsibilities.
Yeah.
Because how many of these conspiracy theorists, what are they? Often they're hermits. They go off and they eschew the rest of society. They don't participate in community and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It absolves them of responsibility
isolate
to be part
themselves.
Of the world.
And, and especially in the church. I mean, we think of the trads that we've known who gather into this group or that group, and a lot of times those groups kind of shrink and then expand and then shrink and expand as people break off and start more groups, which is exactly what Protestantism is. And they form these tiny little groups that don't trust anyone else. And so they don't, well, just financially, they don't take part in what's going on with the rest of the...
Right.
Yeah, okay.
So that's, so it does affect what we do, because that's the thing we have responsibilities as Christians to live in the world.
Right. And sometimes even if you're accepting something that might not be true, it's okay. That's really what I wanted to say to these conspiracy theorists. It's okay if everybody's lying to you and really there's some kind of conspiracy that's driving this or that, whether it's NASA or the 9/11 campaign to raise money for people. Who cares? Okay, maybe it's true. You don't really have much evidence that it's true, but maybe it is. Who cares? That's no reason not to trust all the institutions that we have to trust in order to make a living and get ourselves to heaven.
And think of, and provide a way for your kids to do so as well. I mean, okay,
right.
If the government really did know about 9/11 and allowed it to happen in order to, I don't know, have justification for launching a war in Afghanistan or whatever the theory says, even if that's the case, that doesn't absolve you of responsibility to participate in a political process and to participate in the schooling process for your kids and to try to make it so that the schools are reasonable places raising kids instead of having some of the goofy ideas that they're spreading in school. Yeah. It doesn't absolve you of responsibility to work to make the world a place that's friendly to the kingdom of God. We still have to serve the kingdom of God in the world as it is.
Mm-hmm. I think that says everything I wanted to.
Okay.
Let's see here.
You know what? I'm gonna soapbox here for just a quick second though, because we kind of almost touched on the topic, but we were talking about science, and there is a lot of science that in order to get the science, you have to have a certain level of mathematical understanding and that kind of stuff, but. This doesn't have much to do with conspiracy theory, but once in a while people will say something like, well, I'm a man of science. I mean, you're talking to them about faith or whatever. Mm-hmm. They say, I'm a man of science. And it's like, oh, okay, what does that mean? And here's what's interesting about that. When people say, well, I believe in science, or I'm a man of science, or whatever, think about what they actually, because the people you run across that say that, first of all, they haven't actually performed the science that informs all of the things that they're going to claim science says. Okay, they say, well, yeah, you accept this religious authority, but I'm a man of science. Okay, well, what science have you done? Well, other people have done the science. Okay, what articles, what research paper by these other scientists have you actually read?
Well, Stephen Hawking said...
See, they haven't even done that. What they've read is authors who summarize scientific articles that other people actually, research papers that other people actually write. And actually, there's probably even more levels of indirection before it finally gets into a book at a Barnes & Noble that they pick up off of a shelf that tells them that science has proved that the universe came into existence without God or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So these people who say, oh yeah, I believe in science, not in your authority, your religious authority. It's like, wait a minute, you're giving far more authority to somebody who's far less qualified to have that authority from you than I am as a religious believer.
It's got, I guess I'll explain something here kind of to the audience. If you're like me and like most people, let's say in high school, 9th or 10th grade, you took algebra and you studied, you got through it, you learned to do what they wanted you to do, and then you got out of high school and joined the real world and you forgot all of it. And then years later, your son or daughter comes and says, will you help me with this algebra problem? And you kind of, it kind of looks a little bit familiar. It's not like you just pick it up and do it, but it looks a little familiar. And so you attack the world that way. Danny, on the other hand, if you asked him to do the same calculus stuff he was doing in college, he would be able to do it even though he hasn't done it for 30 years. And my point here is that he's got one of those memories that once he understands some kind of notion, understands the equations, his mind just kind of grips onto it and he remembers it forever. So, and we both come from a family that's very curious. My mom had so many books at our house covering so many different topics. Yeah. And we just...
Dad had built like full walls. I mean, built shelves to cover full walls to hold all the books we have.
And so we just always had books, and we've always read things and been curious about things and looked up things. And so someone like Danny, even though he's not a scientist, although he is an engineer, but understands what I think a lot of scientists don't understand and remembers more than most scientists probably remember. So it's got to drive him nuts. Yeah, I know. Well, when someone says, I'm a man of science, it probably drives him nuts.
Yes.
So, okay. Are we done with the subject?
Well, that's my soapbox. Okay. I'm done. Yep.
All right. So let's look at current events and
what do we got?
Some weird things happening. So Pope Francis, along with I don't know what the Moroccan King Mohammed something or other. I guess is Morocco is a Moroccan king? Is that a king from Morocco? Where's Morocco?
Yeah, Morocco.
Is that in Africa somewhere? Or?
North Africa.
I'm gonna look it up.
Kind of like near the Mediterranean,
northwest Africa. Okay, so apparently this king is calling for the protection of Jerusalem's multi-religious character. This guy wants the city of Jerusalem.
The rejection of Jerusalem's
protection
to be all Jewish. Oh, protection of their multi-religious character.
I think what it boils down to is this guy doesn't want Muslims kicked out of Jerusalem.
Oh, or is Israel threatening to do that?
No,
or is he
but let's face it, the Jewish identity of Israel is getting stronger, especially with Trump, taking part in things like recognizing Jerusalem as the capital and
of Israel.
Mm-hmm. What was it? The Gaza
Strip.
Yeah.
Or the Gaza Strip.
Strip. Mm-hmm. Things like that. And I guess this is some kind of preemptive strike. I don't know. On the part. I don't know why our Pope is... I don't know.
You know how that stuff always works, though? I mean, because we've done that kind of thing as Catholics before, too, right?
What's that?
We have...
Well, we fought over...
protected the multi-religious... Like, for example, Maryland, was a state... colony, whatever, that most colonies in the New World didn't even allow Catholics to hold public office. But Maryland Catholics could. And in fact, Catholic, it's kind of like a Catholic state. And I'm very, very much simplifying the history here. But however, Catholics were not willing to say non-Catholics couldn't hold office. So what happened was that Protestants ended up in office and then said, okay, Catholics can't hold office anymore. I mean, that's why would we expect, and Protestants were, they were at least Christian. Why would we expect that Muslims wouldn't try to do even more so, as they continue to have control? I mean, the only reason to protect that, in my mind, is for Muslims to make a comeback and take Jerusalem back away as a Jewish center.
Possibly by force. Well, probably by force.
Possibly, by force or whatever. Yeah. But the thing is, the Jews might or might not be inclined to do that. I don't feel like they should have to do that.
Right. Well, I don't know. Pope Francis felt like he had to join with this king.
Weigh in on that.
And weigh in on it. I don't know. He's also telling us that the plight of migrants was a wound that cries out to him. What migrants?
I don't know what that
all
means.
Migrants?
What does that mean?
Anyone who migrates?
I think he's talking about immigrants.
Yeah.
That's a good word. He wants us to drop the word immigration and emigration, because if you just say migrant, that immigration implies a legitimacy to the idea of national borders.
Mm-hmm.
migrate into a country or out of a country. I think the attempt to relabel it all as just migration is an attempt to get people to stop thinking of national borders as legitimate things.
Yeah, and I don't know what to say about this. I mean, it...
But you know what's interesting? With all of his recent, and I'm going to call him out on this in our little, discussion here. He really doesn't care what I say. But with all of his recent talk about protecting minors and about human trafficking and the slave sex trade and all that kind of stuff, what is the one thing that the worldwide human slave trade relies on? It's permeable borders.
Yeah.
Whether through the ability to bribe officials or because of just loose policies in the host country. Permeable borders is like it's the sine qua non of the international human slave trade.
It's the spot that they have to get over. I mean, if you've got human beings you want to sell, the big thing you have to get through is the borders, and that's where the bottleneck is and should be.
If you strengthen national borders, you put a great big old crimp in the human slave trade, especially sex slaves.
Yeah.
Now, there are countries who are just going to allow it within their countries. Okay, but you could at least reduce it to those countries somewhat.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of hypocritical for the Pope to be talking about wanting to fight,
I don't even know what he's wanting to fight here. I just know that it's directed at Trump.
Fight minor abuse and abuse of minors.
No more walls.
Through
here it goes.
Trade and stuff.
The issue of migration will never be resolved by raising barriers, fomenting fear of others, or denying assistance to those who legitimately aspire to a better life for themselves and their family. What a load of hogwash.
It is.
He's whining about the wall, is what he's doing.
Exactly. And, it's an unveiled. Unveiled shot.
I don't see him inviting all these migrants into the Vatican to live.
Yeah.
Let them live with him.
But my point is he, just the other week he was talking about the evils of abuse of minors.
Yeah.
In the sex slave trade. And with this kind of talk that he's doing right now, he's giving harbor to the international sex slave trade.
Yeah.
He's encouraging the international sex slave trade with these kinds of attitude and with these kinds of teaching.
See, I'm starting to wonder if, because right away I kind of feel like saying, well, I go between thinking he's so stupid he doesn't understand this, or he's just a really bad guy. It seems like it can only be one of those two.
There's a principle of I don't know who first voiced it, but it says never attribute to malice what can be explained by stupidity.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, maybe he's just not that bright.
I try to stay there. Now, when you have stupidity compounded on stupidity in a group or in an individual that it doesn't make sense for them to be that stupid, then you start to think about malice.
Yeah.
And that's where it's like, okay, are you trying to dismantle the church? Are you trying to dismantle aspects of the ways of the world? Are you really just trying to be a global communist throwback without revealing that that's what you're doing?
Mm-hmm.
With some of this stuff, like trying to use migration instead of immigration, as though national borders aren't real, stuff like that.
Yeah,
you gotta wonder.
Yeah, I don't know. So let's see. We've got a judge in Alaska. Well, it says is a federal judge for the District of Alaska is ruling that Trump's executive order allowing drilling for gas and oil in the Arctic Ocean and parts of the North Atlantic coast exceeds his presidential power. So the judge is saying he needs congressional action. I don't know if that's going to go up to the Supreme Court or what. I don't know. But we've got another judge stopping Trump from making America great again. So, I mean, what's new?
Yeah. It's kind of funny how all these liberals want to throw congressional authorization in the face of things Trump's doing when they weren't willing to willing to put Congress in the way of Obama.
Right. Never.
When they should have.
I mean, Obama did so many things that without any kind of congressional action.
Action. Now,
Trump overturned most of it just with a pen because all of it was executive orders.
Yeah. Now, here's an interesting thing. One of the things that Trump has been about, and in fact, one of the things that he's said he would do is to dismantle the administrative state, which is this kind of it's like the bureaucracy within the government where all the rules are really made. So Congress authorizes just general broad powers to these bureaucracy, and then all the rules are made inside the bureaucracies, and if you run afoul of them, they bring their power to bear, and the court rules aren't even the same and stuff like that. It's an administrative failure to comply. It's not quite the same as a crime, but it can affect your life just as much. So you've got this, and Trump. One of the things Trump has said is he doesn't believe in the administrative state, and so he's talking about dismantling it. So in an irony, if these movements like this judge in Alaska and others actually end up getting the whole country's mood to swing back into this idea that, hey, Congress has to actually authorize things in order for them to happen.
Yeah.
They could end up unwittingly promoting Trump's actual agenda.
Yeah.
Or at least one of them.
See, I think he's got... Look, when you hear him talk, you would swear he's maybe... I don't know. You would swear he worked a blue-collar job his whole life. You know?
Oh, uh-huh.
I mean, he doesn't articulate well. And
he speaks... Yeah.
He talks like he's down to earth, but I think he's got a lot more planned than we realize. I think he's a lot. I think he's a lot smarter, or maybe it's just his instincts. But I think he's thinking way ahead of most people, and that might be where he's thinking ahead.
That could be.
So we got Russia. They're opening up a training facility in Venezuela. Which we warned them against that, and I don't know, I guess we'll see. We told Moscow not to send troops or military equipment to Venezuela, and it seems like they are doing that right now. The Mi 35 millimeter gunship and transport helicopter is a training facilities for pilot is what they're doing.
So they're trying to give military support to prop up the
I think that's what's going on. Yeah,
they're the crumbles of the socialist remnant of a government.
Right, and it's why I don't.
Yeah. Hey, we need them to be ongoing proof that socialism doesn't work and that communism's a big failure. So let's prop up their government with military power. It doesn't even make sense from Russia's point of view to do that.
Yeah, because I mean,
because Venezuela is just such a complete failure as a socialist experiment.
Well, I guess we'll see. But I have to wonder if this is going to turn into something bigger.
It could turn into something. It depends on how we're. Yeah, that's.
Or Cuba.
And it doesn't help that it could very well, because Putin is he wants to restore Russia to its former place as a leader of a bloc.
Right. The USSR.
The old Soviet bloc. He wants to bring back the old USSR. That's what's on Putin's.
So let's see, what else do we got? Okay, so the Senate Republicans, they voted 51 to 48, and what they're doing is they're limiting the debate time for Trump's appointees to 2 hours instead of 30 hours. Okay. So before I guess this is for like his judges and all the other people, I don't know, but they had 30 hours of debate that had to happen. Previously required 30 hours is what the way this is reported. So I didn't know that. No wonder it's taken so long.
That's astounding.
That's insane.
I mean, I could see a 30-hour delay from entry to voting.
Wait a minute.
What?
I think this is what happens is if there's a simple majority and not a what's the opposite of a simple majority?
Like a supermajority.
Supermajority. There's no supermajority. Then, in order to make the simple majority win, there has to be 30 hours of debate. You know what I mean?
And they've changed the rules to limit it to 2 hours.
Okay, now it makes sense. Yeah, that's apparent. Well, that's really good though, because I think there's a long line of people that Trump still needs to get in, and it's been 2 damn years.
And it's stupid because there's the people who are voting against them is not on the qualifications or anything. They're just voting against him because it's Trump.
Yeah, that's all.
Who's appointing them.
Yeah.
They're going to vote against anything Trump does, including his appointees.
Right.
So that kind of makes sense in that context to do that.
Yeah. Speaking of, I mean, there's this ongoing stuff with the Mueller report, and the Democrats want a full copy of it, which is illegal. It's already been established that's illegal for him to turn over the whole unredacted report, because there are grand jury testimonies.
Yeah, grand juries are supposed to be kept secret and stuff like that.
There's a lot of things that really shouldn't be given to the public there, but I'm kind of for the public report, but I mean, obviously some things have to be...
But not contrary to the rule of law in this case.
I mean, Mueller was going after everybody, and he ruined a lot of people's lives, and releasing that report unredacted would probably ruin some more lives. Yeah. That seems to be the game here. So, okay, I got 2 more things. A Japanese space probe, they're saying a bullet at an asteroid to form a crater. I imagine it was more like a missile. Okay. I don't know, but it must have been a big bullet. But how do you fire a bullet in space?
Well, I think all they meant was that it was ballistic and it's not guided.
Okay, so I wonder how they did. I wonder if they used
what did they fire it from? Yeah,
I mean, it wouldn't have been like a gunpowder type of thing, unless they could somehow provide the oxygen for that.
Probably not. Well, I don't think gunpowder needs oxygen. I think that's what the chemical reaction is.
You think the oxygen is in the powder? It needs oxygen to burn.
I don't think so. I don't think it uses oxygen as part of its chemical process.
Okay. Well, I'm going to find that out.
Okay.
Either way, the idea was to to create a crater on the asteroid so that they could get underground. It would be easier to get the samples, underground samples.
Oh, okay.
And get deeper into the asteroid to get samples from it. And I guess this probe is going to be able to come back.
Oh, wow. So this is a probe that's going all the way to the asteroid belt. So this is beyond Mars, between Mars and Jupiter. And it must have...
Are you speculating, or do you...
be... Well, that's where asteroids are, between Mars and Jupiter.
Well, there are some asteroids that are closer, though.
Well, I didn't realize that. I thought the asteroids were the rocks that were orbiting the sun between the Mars and Jupiter orbit.
Okay, I think there are some rather large ones that kind of wander around and have gotten knocked off of course into a belt, and they're in different spots,
different orbits. Okay,
I don't think
this is a space probe that is approaching some asteroid somewhere. And it fired a projectile at the asteroid in order to create a crater, so that it could then do something to get samples from the core of the asteroid.
Right. Now, whether I don't know if it's going to bring it back to Earth, or if it's going to go ahead and analyze it. But it wants to see what's under the surface on this. So I don't know. It's it's pretty neat.
I got to read more on that.
Yeah. And then finally, we've got Jennifer and Sarah Hart. Have you heard about them?
No.
Gay couple in California. They adopted 6 kids, and they drove off a cliff, killing themselves and their entire family.
Seriously?
Yeah, well, that's...
They grabbed a bunch of kids and just Thelma and Louised it right with all the kids in the car?
I don't know if that was the plan the entire time, but it looks like, yes, they intentionally killed themselves and the kid.
Why would they do that? That's insane.
I think
that's horrible.
But I see it's saying Jennifer and Sarah. So I don't. It says they intentionally killed themselves. Does that mean together both of them planned to kill themselves?
Or did just one of them plan it? the other one maybe didn't know.
That's insane. But I don't know. I mean, little things like that, it's like it doesn't do a whole lot for your whole argument for gay families, stuff like that.
No. I mean, you'd think especially in California, the land of the goofy, that they would feel right at home there and not have any reason to kill themselves and their kids. Exactly.
But they killed everyone. So, well, I hate to end on a sour note. Hopefully you got something from the land of nonsense that'll lighten the mood.
Okay. Sure, the land of the nation of nonsense here. So, you know what? Both of my stories from the nation of nonsense it kind of follows suit on the previous one because they're both in California. We've got a couple of drivers who spent over an hour fighting over a parking spot in Los Angeles, and people have caught this on video. Two drivers in California were willing to waste a good chunk of their day duking it out for a parking spot. The encounter took place in Koreatown, neighborhood of Los Angeles. Dubbed the black car and the silver car, the drivers in each vehicle appeared to spend close to 2 hours, around 6 to 8, trying to parallel park along a sidewalk.
Wait a minute.
The drivers of both vehicles waited in the street, turning on their hazard lights and backing up traffic because of their standoff for a parallel parking spot next to the sidewalk.
This is a Seinfeld episode. Have you ever seen it?
Serious?
Yeah, it's a Seinfeld. George and some friend of Kramer's got they're both trying to pull into a spot, and they're both halfway in and halfway out.
Standoff?
Yeah, there's a standoff, and it's like the rest of the night. And I think even there's at some point a truck needs to get through, so they agree to move the cars and then move them back into place to continue the standoff.
Well, there you have it. Only on Seinfeld and California.
Yeah. Well, New York and California. Yeah, I guess you'd think in California with all the non-drivers out there that there'd be more parking area, but I don't know. I'll tell you what. I got to be honest. I hate going down to the parking. I despise it. The whole time I'm going towards downtown, I'm saying a rosary just for a parking spot. And sometimes it works, but sometimes I just drive around and around in a circle looking for a parking spot. And if I can get anyone to go downtown with me, I will. And say, here, you drive around the block a couple times while I go in and do whatever I got to do.
Go do your business, and then, that's...
But... I don't know.
Well, Cincinnati at least has those blocks where if you can get the right way, you can drive around in a block or maybe a 2-block area of one-way streets only, and just drive around until either something opens up or, like you said, if you've got someone with you, they can just keep driving around.
And they still have some parking garages, but the parking garages are like insane. It's like sometimes $20 for an hour.
Wow.
And it's,
I haven't seen that.
if I'm working on a machine downtown...
That's nonsense.
I got to raise my prices for downtown. It's like, sorry, it costs me $20 to park.
Yeah. My.
I've always hated downtown with a passion, but...
Okay. Well, apparently it's even worse in L.A. Well, this is Koreatown, L.A., so...
Yeah.
All right. My other one is from San Francisco. Unusual home in a suburb of San Francisco pays homage to the Flintstones, complete with dinosaurs, life-size Fred Flintstone.
Wait a minute. Start over. I didn't hear.
Okay. In a suburb of San Francisco, there's this house that pays homage to the Flintstones.
Oh, okay.
And they have dinosaurs on their lawns and a life-size Fred Flintstone.
Oh, really?
And they're in a legal fight with town officials and a property owner.
Why?
Well, let's see.
Are you talking about like they want the stuff taken down?
The assistant city attorney says, we don't like it when people build things first and then come in and demand or ask for permission later. It's not fair to everyone else.
How about if they don't ask permission?
He built something that is visible from the highway. I guess these dinosaurs are kind of tall. I don't know. He built something that happens to be visible from the highway without asking permission. And in California, the land of the weird, that's a no-no.
I thought California is the land of the free, where everybody's...
That's it. Free to do? Well, yeah. Unless you run afoul of their sense of... you've got to have the permission of everybody else.
What I want to know is, where does Hanna-Barbera stand on all this?
Well, that would be the more interesting question, wouldn't it?
Except Hanna-Barbera, dude, you can't just
anymore.
Build our stuff.
Didn't they sell everything to Cartoon Network or something?
I have no idea.
I think they did.
I was talking to this cartoonist once, and he was showing me the different things that they do to get, because you don't want to. If you look at old cartoons, you can tell each picture was actually drawn, and whereas as they got newer, they would have a background and then a character who would move around, and the background would stay the same, and they would use transparent films to accomplish this. Mm-hmm. And he said Hanna-Barbera was the worst about recycling everything. They would draw maybe 5 new pictures per cartoon and just recycle all the old stuff. So a character, you'd see the same character. It's the same drawing for like a whole season. They didn't draw one new character.
You've got the animation of Shaggy walking, mm-hmm. and they would just play that animation with different backgrounds moving behind.
Right. Everywhere.
Sometimes not even at the right speed for his feet.
So I wonder if he stole some of their recycling stuff and he's putting it on display in his yard, and that's what their problem is.
Because there's no this seems to be all about the city and the fact that he didn't ask permission.
That's insane.
To put something that happens to be visible from the highway.
Insane. I thought you were going to talk about Hanna-Barbera suing him or something.
She uses the yard. This is the owner. Uses the what? No. She uses the yard for charity events and stuff like that. I mean, people like it, but the city doesn't like that she didn't ask permission.
I would bet anything that somebody has a personal problem with this guy, like got in an argument or something with him, and that's where this whole thing stems from. People are like that. I think so. Well, hopefully he wins.
But to me, the quote from the assistant city attorney to me it says everything. We don't like it when people build things first, and then come in and ask for permission later. It's like,
well, why do people have to ask permission for anything? I'm building it. What do you care?
Unless what they're building represents some possible, safety problem to somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. That's just how liberals are.
I'm gonna build a model of a dinosaur on my yard. So what? But in California and probably in a lot of other parts of the United States, in today's modern age, people get upset about that stuff too. City officials and stuff.
Yeah.
That's kind of a modern thing. They just don't like people being allowed to just do stuff.
Yeah, it's like
it's a problem with modern politics.
That's not what all the neighbors are doing, so he shouldn't do that. He should get some kind of special permission for doing that, or I cannot imagine living in a place with like homeowners association. Jason's getting his taste of that right now, I think.
He is. I know. He wants to build that shed. He was told that it wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah.
And now he's got to get approvals and stuff for a shed he wants to build. A shed in your backyard.
Yeah, no man should not have a shed.
Yeah.
All right. Is that all we got?
That's all I've got.
Okay.
That's all I got.
Well, hopefully we made sense for some of these truthers out there. Or, I don't know. I guess my point was I just wanted to let some of them know it's okay. You don't got to feel the whole world's against you. And I think a lot of them do.
Yeah.
And it's okay. Even if they're lying to you, so what? It's okay.
Yeah. You don't need to make up stuff. There's enough of the world being against us just because we're Christians.
Yeah. Yeah. There's enough apparent things that are against us. We don't got to make up stuff that's not apparent. So,
right.
I guess think about what we said.
And as always,
circle the beads.